Welcome back to the Driven Leadership Podcast, everybody. We're back this week at the table with Austin and Eric. Thanks for joining the table again, guys. How's everybody feeling?
Happy to be here.
Never left.
Just here constantly.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, this week we're talking about a sore subject for some. Why employees leave, which is kind of a broad scope of conversation. So we were just talking before this that we're going to tie in some actionables or kind of dissect through this. But Eric, you put this topic on the board when we first started the podcast a while ago. So what are your thoughts in terms of how do you want this conversation to go?
I just think I think this is an issue everybody deals with in one way or another. And it is also an issue that has a lot of misconception around it, because a lot of times when people leave, we don't always know exactly what's going on. And I mean, if you start this from the statistically normal proven thing, why people leave, it's typically because of their manager, who they work with, that direct relationship. But then you're going to hear things. We were just talking about this before we hopped on here. You're going to hear things like, oh, I got more money over here, or this happened and this is why this is going on. And so a lot of times it takes quite a number of people to leave before managers start to go, wait, maybe it's me. And if it is, there are core behaviors that can really help and create something different. The other, number two, why employees leave, statistically saying, and I saw this in a study, and I'm pretty sure it was by Gallup, it's probably 5 years ago now, but it's been consistent for a long time, is that onboarding plays a big part in whether or not you get a long-term, return. And that's when I see over and over, we go into companies over and over, they screw up onboarding. Yeah. And it doesn't mean onboarding needs to be a, 5-month experience, but onboarding needs to have attention put to it. There needs to be care put to it, and it needs to be done well to help formulate some of the relationships, help people feel comfortable so they have a long-term view in the company. And there's things we can do to help that as well. So those were my initial two thoughts on kind of what to talk about, is that relationship with the manager and how to onboard properly. But there's a million things, and Austin's got, I'm already talking about some good ideas on different reasons why people leave. But I think buying into everybody's leaving because they're getting more money or it's a better opportunity, especially in a company that's got higher than normal turnover, mostly BS. Yeah. It's just not where it's at.
And when you were saying there was addressing this problem, is the problem from the leadership perspective of just understanding they don't know why people are leaving, and so that's the problem that you see a lot, is like they have a high turnover and they can't put their finger on the reason? Is that what you've seen?
I think they all draw their own conclusions. I think they think they know the reason, but if they really knew the reason, then they would solve the problem. And usually they're not solving the problem. And then it becomes cultural and systemic, and it's like, oh gosh, I had one department that was an issue, and now I've got the whole company's an issue.
Yeah.
And what's going on? And anyway, there's some core things that you can do and do some self-evaluation on how we're showing up in some of these categories. And if we're not doing so well, how do you get to well? How do you start moving the needle on these?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I'm going to actually flip the question here a little bit. If you're wondering why people are leaving, ask the question why people would stay. Because if you start asking people, hey, why do you stay with the company? And I don't just mean ask yourself that question. I mean, go to the people that are staying and ask that question. If you find you see this trickling effect of people leaving, go ask, why do you stay here? You'll get some staggering answers, in which will help you understand why people leave. Because those are in my experience, through leading others in figuring out why people are leaving, or figuring out why people are leaving in different businesses I was in or running as a leader, those two things work very closely together. Go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
No, I was just going to say they work together, and I believe they are one and the same.
Yeah, I just love where you went there. So why should I stay? And I didn't even go, are your high performers fighting to stay?
Yep.
You know, like, are they finding reasons as to why to stay, or are they finding reasons, you know, and I'm specifically talking about your high performers, your ones that outproduce, your ones that have departments and teams that really produce. They're the ones that you want to build your company around.
Yeah.
And if they're sitting there and they're going, man, I want to be here. Let's figure this out. I get this is off or whatever's going on. If they're in that place, you got a culture and management that's generally healthy and we're moving towards something. And if they're sitting there going, you know, I don't know if I should even be here. I don't know if I should stay. I don't even know if I want to be around you anymore. Then
I just haven't found a higher paying job yet.
I haven't found the higher pay. And then that leads to the outcomes later. And they go, oh, they found a higher paying job. They were looking for a higher paying job.
Because of a more systemic issue.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're going, I can tolerate where it's at, but I'd rather take a chance with more money. Of course, I'd rather take a chance on this other position that I don't know what the culture is like or my manager's going to be or any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I get paid a little bit more, but it's not going to be, I'd rather take the chance than stay and deal with this mess that's happening here.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking one person. I'm talking your general high performance group. If you're dealing with that, then you got stuff to change.
Yeah, and I would put another question there too, is are people in your company seeking growth? Because then so the tiers there, right? So I'm leaving, then go to why are you staying? Then go, do people want to grow? Because I believe if you go back down the other way, it leads to itself. If you have a group of people or you have people in your company and the majority of your culture doesn't want to grow into something else, then why should they stay? And then they're going to leave. It is a progression. If they don't have growth opportunities, they don't see a future for themselves in the company, that's an indicator of it. If they're not seeking growth opportunities, they don't see themselves here for the future. Why are they staying? Well, because I couldn't find a higher paying job. I can't find one that fits within my schedule. This just logistically works out the best. Or they're just, they're kind of one of those people that won't make a decision unless they're forced to. And so it just hasn't gotten bad enough, which,
but then
God.
But then they're inherently disengaged and not.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's exactly it. It goes the other way. It starts to go down. It's like, oh, and they stop being a high performer.
Yeah, and then they leave. And so, you have this, I love what you said earlier, Eric, is you have to delineate where within your business you're losing folks and where you're losing their attention, their inspiration, their motivation. Because, and I've said this really talking to a lot of people about culture, and this is probably from a book I've read or just being in Chick-fil-A. So this isn't like an original concept, but I just love the way it feels and makes me think about is no one comes, or rarely do people come into a business going, man, I'm really excited and I want to suck and be an underperformer and I want to fail. Like no one does that. Like no one is.
You said that to me when you started a Driven.
Absolutely. I'm living up to that promise.
Oh my God.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's good to have goals, though.
Hey. Well, because but what you'll hear leaders say in the top of companies is they go, hey, where do you find good people? That was one of my favorite questions that I got asked as a leader in Chick-fil-A. I'm running around the dining room on a Saturday in a tie, and obviously I'm a manager, and people didn't come and go, man, this food's really good, or this sauce really kicks. I love it. They would say, where do you get that guy over there? How do you get your people to smile? And I would say, well, we beat them in the back, or we clone them, or, like we find them in the gutters, or we ship them in, like whatever answer I wanted to pull out there. But the reality was, it was sad to me every time someone asked that. We would have people come into our dining room to intentionally poach our people, which I was actually great with. I was like, look, you want to come in and try? If they'll leave, that'll tell me something about our culture. But that question of where do you get your people, or why don't I have great people, or my people aren't where your people are, and that whole comparison game really also funnels into why people leave. Because if I'm coming in with a mindset that my people aren't good, or I need to go find these great people, you're innately not growing and developing and creating an organization that is producing the best versions of the people you already have. And so I'm not saying that you cannot go external and hire and go find great talent. Always be searching for great talent. But at the same time, how are you maximizing the talent in your organization that you already have? And if you're ignoring that reality, people are going to leave regardless.
You mentioned earlier that there are some things that you can look at and measure as, I guess, as people are leaving or before they start leaving, as preemptive measures. So what are some of those things that we can look at?
Yeah. So starting this off, let's start with, do you know what your core values are for your organization? And I don't just mean whatever you wrote on the wall at one point. What are really the values of the organization? And have you gone through the process of digging through? And I got to tell you, for years, I thought that was just foo-foo stuff. Why does that really matter?
I think a lot of people do. Yeah.
The why it matters is because if you don't hire to match your core values, then it's just not going to work, because you're going to work together for a while. You're going to be going right. They're going to be going left. You can't align. You can't get there. So if you don't know your core values and they're not your real core values and you're looking for help with that, we can help you with that. But it is, you need to know what your core values are, real ones. Then when we're hiring, we need to make sure and ask questions that help us understand how they would show up. And they don't all have to be perfect with the core values, but they got to at least understand it. We got to be in a similar mindset. Then when we're hiring managers, we're not hiring managers because they were good at the job they're going to be managing in most cases. Occasionally that matters. Occasionally you need to know it really well. But in most cases, you don't need a manager who's good at that job. You need a manager that's good at people. That's good at systems. That's good at communication. That's emotionally aware and intelligent. Like, that's who you hire into management. And now what you get are people that can handle conflict and can connect with people and can run a one-on-one in a manager's meeting, or they're in these type of meetings and they're producing results coming out of it. They can follow a plan, but they have ideas and they're creative. They're not afraid, as we've done in some of these others, where people are afraid to be in a leadership role. They're not sitting there terrified to be in it. They're interested and excited about it. Like, so we get quality people in management that are connected to our core values and know where we're going. Now we hire somebody to come in and work with that manager. And that manager connects with them. They know what they're doing. They care about them. They're also creating accountability, but not by autocratically holding them to it. They're creating accountability by setting expectations, getting excited about those expectations, empowering them. And when they're off, helping nudge them, move them back in the right direction. And when there's an issue, they're handling the issue. They're not hiding from it or overcorrecting with the issues that go on. Which to get managers like that, you hire well and then you develop them. And if you don't have internal development, guess what? We can help you with that too.
Come on.
So it is, when you start putting all this together, what you start to create is a cohesive, consistent culture of growth and accountability and all these type of things. And so people come in, they know what's expected. They know how to do it. Well, there's the other part. I'm going to come in. What's your onboarding look like? When they come in, are they, number one, do they understand all the simple basic stuff? What to wear, where to show up? What are you going to be doing? What does your day typically look like? What problems are you solving? What are you accountable for? All those type of things. What do you have to deliver in here? Meet the people they're going to be working with. Hey, that's Bob. I'm going to have you spend an hour, Bob, later today. You're going to be meeting Sally over here, and you're going through and you're meeting people and you're connecting with them. There is a structure to onboarding. Hey, from 4 to 5, you're going to spend time with Austin. Tomorrow morning, you're going to be doing that. And it's planned out in front. Why? Because that says stability. It says people know what they're doing and knows where to go. So I know I'm spewing 100 things at once, but to me, it's like you start putting these things together and each one its own little module. How we hire, who are we, those core values. How do we actually, when we hire managers, how do we get people that are skilled at this job, not what they're managing over? And then we move to, now we're going to bring on employees. Yes, we want the skill set that's required, but we're going to set out a plan that is stable. They know what's going on. They know what's around the next corner. They're connected to the key players that they need to be connected to, and they know what's expected. And then we're going to check in with them after we go through the couple of days of onboarding. Maybe it's a week of onboarding. I know some companies do it for weeks, but that's because they have a lot of training to get through, and there's certain skill sets we got to develop. That's fine. Whatever it is, we go through that. Then they're a couple days into it, maybe the first day. You as the manager, you go by and you go, how's it going? How can I help? What's working and not working? We're checking in again at the end of the week. How's it going? What's working and not? We're doing this, and we're doing check-ins, and we're caring about our people. You do that, your turnover is going to go dramatically down.
Absolutely.
So is this a case of like if a company is experiencing high turnover, if they're hemorrhaging people, maybe not hemorrhaging, but they're bleeding people. You're saying if they go and put effort into these tactics, it will address that hemorrhaging or that
It
turnover.
will, but there's some. All right, so if we're dealing with a company that's hemorrhaging, you more than likely have management issues. Okay, you've got people in place that are not doing a good enough job to carry whatever we need to do. There's also probably a lot of stress and pressure for performance happening in the organization because performance isn't up to standard. We can't figure that out. So it's unfortunately with bad management, it's a pretty obvious cliff that goes on. It's like you put the bad manager in play and all of a sudden we have problems. Things aren't working. We're not hitting numbers and people are leaving. So I look at that and I go, but this is a person that's worked for you for 15 years. What do you do? And that's where the hard conversations come in. If there's a place they can not manage, maybe that's helpful. But more than likely, you've got to make some tough calls in there and start shifting some things. And as you shift them, you start getting results. I'm not saying fire your 15-year manager. I am saying you got to do some fair evaluation of what's actually taking place at the management level. But if you're hiring bad managers and you're allowing them to stay, well, now we need to talk at the top of the company. Because the top of a company is allowing all these things to happen and they're not getting involved in a healthy way to create change.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is
that's the instance of like hemorrhaging. And then if there's just generally a high turnover over a longer period of time, if you implement these like core values, solid onboarding, then that will address that on that front end.
It does. But everything I ran through is kind of like a rebuild from scratch kind of feel for some companies, some groups. And it's overwhelming. And that's where I go, use us. Like a selfless plug, but I'm like, that's where we get in. We have tools to help evaluate where are the weak points. Yep. And then when we know the weak points, now we can, address it with training, but sometimes it's addressing with structure. It's getting into why is it so confusing or whatever's taking place. Onboarding is actually, in my opinion, always the lowest hanging fruit. It's just nobody does it well because they don't put time into it because they don't understand the payoff.
Yeah.
Well, they always say, I don't have enough time, right? We don't have enough time. We don't have enough money. I just got to get them in the door. Well, calculate, it's really interesting. We did a study back in the day of how much it costs on a turnover employee, right? And that's different for every person, is different for every role. And so what I would challenge you to do if you're having a turnover issue is go figure out how much it costs to onboard every single new employee with your current system and how much money you're losing in losing them. And you will find out really quickly that you actually have more resource if you kept more people than you think you do. And you have to create the space for it. There's just no exception. I think the study that I remember changed my mindset on this was it's the first 40 hours of an employee's work history that determines their success in the company. And so based upon your first 40 hours, how'd that work out for you? Right?
That's interesting.
You remember more of your first 40 hours of work than you will any other time in your period. And if you question that or don't think that's real, think back to your first day at your job or the first week of your job. You're going to remember so much more than you do on the day-to-day because that is just our human nature. We remember new. So
can you imagine, like, somebody comes into work first 40 hours and they go home, right? The first day they go home, first 8 hours, and they walk home, and whoever's at home, they just go, man, that was awesome. I learned so much. They're wonderful people. I can't wait to go back. Let's say that's their mindset. And then the next, now they're at 16 hours and they come home similar. And then all the way up to 40 hours. That's their first week. And they come home, and every day they're coming home, and whoever's there, they're telling how amazing it was, what they learned that day, where it's going. And what that anchors in and what's created, flip that, right? They come in after 8 hours. They go, oh, I don't know if I can do this. They just threw me in. I was talking to clients and I had to make stuff up. I didn't know what to do. I know I broke 3 things, but I don't know how to fix it. And I didn't even know who to tell.
Man, if that's from day one, like that, it's a hard feeling to get away from somebody.
Well, what happens is you automatically go in, did I make the right decision?
Yeah.
And there's
like,
no history.
Shit.
Yeah, like how did I get myself here again? And that kind of goes back to what I said earlier, is like no one shows up on their first day like I'm ready to suck and I'm ready to just do bad work. And so if there's disengagement or if there's issues, most likely it starts there. Do they know who to go to? Do they know the answers? And that was like something we did early on. And I loved this kind of mindset. Was a lot of times we treat, and I think it's a Simon Sinek quote, is treat your team like family and they'll treat your customers like guests. Something along those lines.
We heard that one.
And it was pretty wild to me, in Chick-fil-A at the time. People would just come in and kind of get thrown on the line. We joked about it at times and we hated it. But I mean, I never forget Connor's first day. We just threw him out there. Keep going, baby. We just, threw him in the fire.
He's still shaking his head over.
And it's like, if you
I thought it was a test. I genuinely they left me by myself in a position that's normally has like 3 people in the middle of lunch. Right. Left me. And I was like, okay, like this is where I have to prove myself. And I put my head down and I just ground it out, dude. And it was miserable.
And that's when we knew.
Okay, when's the test over, guys? Like, this isn't fun anymore. And then, of course, they came over and were like, where is everybody? Like, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. So,
crying in the corner.
Literally.
That was terrible.
But that's kind of how we treated it. Like, if they can make it through, then they're good. And they'll be fine as long, develops grit or whatever we want to say. Yeah, but as we switch that mentality, and I've seen this in other businesses as well, as you intentionally focus efforts on creating that to be the best it possibly can, to expose them to what your culture really is, to instill the values. I think, Eric, you said this earlier. It's like you have to know what your values are, but that's the opportunity to translate those values. Because
and let them run with it afterwards. Then, because if you translate what your values are in that first week, then you can let them go. You can let them be independent, and you can trust that they've bought into what those values are and they're making those decisions within those values. Well, and it's not like, well, why did you do that? You've been here for 6 months. It's like, well, I've just been doing what I always do. Nobody told me,
but it's also
realities.
I exactly what you said. So I start working in a place and I'm like, okay, I've heard these are the values. And then I get in there and the rest of the team isn't living them.
That's
So it's like, it's not just on board. It's like, we got to actually, if these are our values, this is what we're living. And if somebody doesn't match up to the values, they don't get to stay there.
Yeah.
It's like, in the obvious values, like let's take integrity. Every company out there, it's a pay to play value. No, I said that wrong. It is
permission to play.
Permission to play. Thank you. Pay to play. Playing too many games lately. So permission to play. Like, it's every company has integrity. If somebody steals from the company, they're not going to work there anymore. We got to dig deeper than that. And as we start to dig in, what makes this place unique? What do we stand for? Who are we? Why does it matter? And have those conversations. It starts to create something pretty magical when we're hiring and people could talk to it. And they're like, yeah, this is, we were just having this conversation in Driven, and one of them that we have on there, and we're wordsmithing it still, getting the words right, but we had Make It Happen. And why this really stuck to me is because I feel that way so much about, especially Austin, Connor, with you guys. And man, the hoops we're jumping through to make it happen and to make some of the shifts and do all that stuff. There's a mindset that goes with that, and it's required. And I can tell you, we have hired people not to their detriment, just that they weren't in a space where they're like, yeah, we're going to make it happen. We're going to figure this out. They've always had excuses that are connected to it. That sounded rough. I don't mean they weren't in that space. Yeah. And so the end result was it didn't work the way Mary and I always thought it would, but it was because we didn't have clarity on the values. And when you have that clarity, now people get excited about it because you start being around like-minded people that are pushing and rowing in the same direction. They're working towards it. And then when I'm hired and I'm brought in and I see all this in action, I start to go, oh, I get this. And I have a choice. Does that fit me? Does it not fit me?
Yeah.
Did I lie on my interview process, or is this really who I am?
Right.
And anyway, yeah.
I think also too, Eric, to that point, like just speaking of core values, is if your core value is integrity, but people don't know how to live that out. I think Andy Stanley talks about it in a podcast or in one of his books, but make the value actionable if you can. Make it say what the outcome is, because as you even put people in that, now you're not just basing it on a word that has perceptual value, but you're basing it on actions that are not subjective. Are you making it happen or are you not? Not, like integrity is a good word there, but do you have integrity? Well, my line of integrity is different than your line of integrity or my moral ethics. And so that it kind of gets into this weird world. And that's why there's classes in college of ethics, not because it's a hard thing to identify, but make it happen. It's like, okay, are you doing things in their culture that are making things happen, or are you passively allowing things to happen? And I think as you do that and drill that down to more actionable phrases as well, it gives clarity to the team. But past that too, it really starts to open up. What you said, I think, is beautifully well said. It's not that they're bad people. Like they've let themselves go from our culture in different seasons. People left that were necessary turnover. It was good. It wasn't they're bad people. It's they didn't match what we were doing and where we were going. And that's okay. That necessary turnover is really good. A good thing when it becomes, they're not bad people. They weren't necessarily producing terrible results. They could have been fine here, but long-term, it's worse for them and worse for our company. We keep them here because they're not a cultural fit. And let's cut that cord before we waste a lot of time, energy, effort, and money. And
if you, go ahead. Yep.
I was going to say, if you don't have your values, you can't do that.
You don't have that North Star to point to.
If you don't let them go, they will stay.
Yep.
And that's the worst thing that could happen. You start filling your company with people that don't fit, and then the company shifts and changes, and you're wondering why it doesn't fit you, who may be a founder or originator. It's like, you got to get this clear and have the right people surrounding it. And then all these other things start working. So why do people leave? People leave because their manager sucks. Sure. And there's a lot you can do to develop managers or hire the right managers. But when it comes down to it, do you know your culture, who you are, your values, and is that lived throughout your company? So when people show up and they're onboarded well, they want to be there, and your high performers are going to see it. They're going to gravitate to it. They're going to stick to it. And then they're going to go make this thing amazing. And you're probably going to have higher turnover in the beginning when you start getting this stuff clear, because you're going to have to, there's potentially some people that don't fit anymore.
A little bit of friction.
Yeah. One of the largest things from my personal experience in leadership here is, if I don't know how to show up, it's really hard for me to stay. Like if I don't know how to be, like, and I look back on situations where I did know that and had utter confidence in that, and I knew exactly what that was. Okay. Nothing else had to be mapped out. I just needed to know what just point me and I'm going to go. I'm like an arrow. Just let me go. And I think a lot of high achievers are like that. And I'm not like just putting myself in that boat, but even if I talk to other leaders, I've said, hey, why did you leave that company? Well, I just didn't know. I didn't fit, right? It's a kind of a term I hear a lot, like, or I don't know, it just wasn't for me. Well, why? Well, I didn't know what to do. We underestimate that reality a lot of times for people, and how important that is. Like, what is that core need of belonging, feeling like they're able to contribute? Like, a lot of the core significance, a lot of the 6 core needs fit in so well with, if our onboarding is good and our values are good, and how that allows people to confidently show up and perform at their best, because most people want to, unless your hiring just is garbage. But then fire your hiring manager and find a new one, and then solve some problems too. So
Well,
Wow.
I think that we've really nailed this one. I like where we're at with it. Any final thoughts we want to close out with? Other than,
Yeah,
fix your
call
managers,
us.
fix your
That's
core
my
values.
final thought. This is,
I mean,
I mean, it's not serious. And usually I
100%.
don't do the self promoting thing, but I'm like,
Yeah.
this stuff is hard for a lot of people, a lot of companies, and it's a big part of why we exist is because we can help. This is what we do. We get in there, we help managers and leaders develop, and help with some of these processes and help them grow. So shameless plug at the end, but it's exciting.
I think shameless is warranted. No shame.
Yeah, no shame.
And I just want to say, this is why, if you ever have gotten a proposal from us or worked with us in the past, like we do a 360 team diagnostic, this is why, because we want to know before we get in there and before we start talking about, hey, let's develop your managers and let's develop your leaders, what's really going on, because are people at the door knocking? Are they searching for other opportunities? Are they hungry for growth and they just want to see some things change? That dictates how companies operate. So whether you work with us or work with anybody else, I think you should work with us. But if they're not doing that and they're just operating off of what you say or what some key leaders say in the company, I'd be cautious of that. And that's just regardless of who you work with and who you work for or who you partner with in that. Find somebody that's going to dig in deep to the culture, because its values are what we do repeatedly. Culture is the behavior that is constantly involved in that. Culture isn't just created. It's intentionally built. So,
yeah. Well, thanks for joining us this week at the Driven Leadership Podcast, everybody. If you have any questions about this stuff in more details, how to develop your core values, like we said, get a 360, please reach out. podcast@drivenleadership.com. This is the kind of stuff that we love getting our hands into within companies. If you have these problems, we got the solutions. This up. So, Austin, Eric, thanks as always for joining, and we'll see you in the next episode, everybody.
Bye.
Later.